Well, folks, we've reached the end. The final Patrick Troughton season of Doctor Who, or as I like to call it, the season of robots. Because, oh boy, there were a lot of robots this season. The villains either were robots or used robots. Let's get to it. First, we meet the Dominators. These guys in ridiculous looking outfits who use these boxy, spike ball headed aliens to enslave basically space hippies, well, space pacifists, for their own sinister ends. The one on the right, he's a right sadist. He enjoys vaporizing the peace lovers and blowing up all their stuff. The one on the left, the leader, he's a little more level-headed in that he wanted to enslave the peace lovers in order to get them to dig holes in certain parts of their world on this island that used to be contaminated with radiation, but was sucked into their, the radiation that is, was sucked into their saucer spaceship as a power source. And that's why they're digging holes in their little island. They want to blow up part of it and get at the radioactive center, which of course will kill the peace lovers, whom they have no regard for. Well, you know what I mean, for whom they have no regard. Anyway, the Doctor, Jamie, Zoe, and a few of the peace lovers that managed to get back some of their warrior spirit, they do manage to beat back the Dominators and their robots, which are called quarks and have really, really high, silly voices. Far different than what you would think killer robots would be like. Anyway, they managed to take out the Dominators by taking basically a nuclear football that the Dominators planted and smuggling it aboard their ship. So when they left, boom, boom, bye-bye. Unfortunately, they weren't able to stop the other devices that they had placed from causing the island to turn into a volcano. Luckily, the peace lovers made it off the island quickly, but Jamie and Zoe were too busy marveling at the natural fury to realize they were standing on an active volcano. It fell to Jamie to remind the Doctor and Zoe that they had to get the duck out of Fudge. And they do. Unfortunately, the TARDIS gets surrounded by lava, which caused the fluid link to overheat a bit. So in order to get them out of danger, the Doctor had to activate a control system for emergencies only, which kind of took them out of reality and put them square in the crosshairs of the Mind Robber. Basically, a character referred to as the Master, who had a very sinister laugh and who was manipulating the Doctor, Jamie, Zoe, and several characters out of fiction. But funny enough, it wasn't the Master, like the Master, but just a guy from the 1920s who was basically forced to be an engine for this computer that was able to bring fictional characters to life. Now, some of the characters proved helpful to the gang, but others proved very dangerous at times. They actually made a unicorn threatening, which probably is the first time, but thanks to the movie Cabin in the Woods, it's not the last. Also, this episode is probably one of those that would have been good as a Tom Baker era serials, because it did have some pretty intense scenes. Oh, and not only did the Mind Robber have fictional characters, and even clockwork soldiers, which probably were the inspiration for the Clockwork Men in a future Who serial, which I'll talk about later. But he also used these white robots, which honestly are a lot more intimidating than the Quarks, to be honest. Luckily, the Doctor was able to free Jamie and Zoe from the clutches of the Mind Robber and break part of the computer that was holding the poor 1920s writer hostage, basically, using him as a puppet. And once everything went kerflooey, the unreality that the Mind Robber's lair resided in dissolved, and Jamie, Zoe, and the Doctor went back into the TARDIS, which blew apart at the beginning of the serial, but was pulled back together at the end, thankfully. And the writer went back to the 20s to hopefully live out the rest of his life. Unfortunately, the TARDIS ended up on the dark side of the moon with an incoming missile. So it had to make a forced landing on Earth, which caused a few circuits to burn out. It couldn't even fully materialize. It was invisible for the whole serial. Well, except for the last episode. And the Doctor had to track down Professor Travers from the 2 Yeti incidents to see if he can't help fix the circuits on the TARDIS. Unfortunately, because budget reasons didn't allow for the character to be used again, they had a professor named Watkins crash at Travers' old place, along with his niece, who is a model, an amateur photographer, and could be a bit ditzy sometimes, but she was useful through the adventure. Unfortunately, the main character they come across while looking for Watkins is a guy named Vaughn, basically a corporate bigwig who is played by none other than the guy who played Mavek Chen in the Daleks' Master Plan, so you know he's going to be a bad guy. Turns out he's implanting unnecessary technology in his electronics and spreading that technology all over the world for nefarious ends. And he is rather unfeeling. He's basically like a Gestapo guy. He's even got jackbooted thugs who end up killing this guy who helps Jamie and Zoe get back to civilization, and the Doctor get back to civilization in the process. Also, as it turns out, he's been helping some Cybermen cyber-convert people who are smart enough to be useful. Yep, the Cybermen are back, and they have a new look. For the first time, the doll-headed look. Unfortunately, their voices are far less enjoyable to hear than before. Honestly, their gravelly voices from the 2 previous adventures, those were okay. But now their voices are kind of squeaky and doll-like. Elmo-ish. That's it. They're Elmo-ish. Very much like the Quarks. But their built-in weapons are a little more efficient. They don't even have to point anything, just their bodies. That doesn't help their voices, though. But the silliness of their look is overshadowed by the fact that we get some awesome scenes. Because when Vaughn unleashes this signal which disables most of the people on Earth, the Cybermen break out of the sewers in force, and we get to see them for the first time march out of St. Paul's Cathedral. A very iconic image which is repeated, I believe, several times in Doctor Who. Luckily, the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe don't stand alone. For Lethbridge Stewart is back. He's been promoted to Brigadier and is now head of the United Nations Intelligence Task Force, or UNIT. Of course, the real United Nations doesn't like being associated with Doctor Who for some reason, so they changed it to United Intelligence Task Force later. But I digress. UNIT more or less successfully fights off the Cybermen, while the Doctor tries to convince Vaughn that the Cybermen are not going to let him keep control of the world, because that's what he wants, control of the world, because he wants humanity to be more ordered. He actually thinks he's helping people by taking away their civil liberties. But the Cybermen double-cross him. They had planned to fully cyber-convert him, but he only let them partially convert him to give him a little more vitality. But after he gets into an argument with the cyber controller, this big collection of wires and glass balls, rather than a humanoid cyber converter, or cyber leader, I should say. Cyber controller. He ends up blasting the thing, and later they blast him. But in the end, he did prove helpful. If only because he hated the Cybermen so much for betraying him. Ultimately, they win the day, thanks to Zoe's calculations of rocket trajectories and a super cooled fusion device. This is where my tongue stops working. Fitted to a Russian rocket targeting the main Cyberman ship. And ultimately, the circuits that the Doctor needed are fixed, and they ultimately restore the TARDIS and go on their merry way. And Watkins' niece might even end up being a military wife in the future. Although she did seem kind of dismayed that captains don't really get paid much. Although he probably later told her that they have a steady paycheck even after they leave the military. So who knows? Bottom line, once again, the Doctor prevails over the Cybermen. On to the next adventure, the Krotons. These guys are seriously sourpusses. They're some sort of crystalline robots that basically keep a group of people called the Gonds, Gonds, enslaved while building up the smartest among them to basically be power sources for their ship, which is trying to get back into orbit. And once they basically drain the brains of these smarties, they vaporize them. They have no regard for humanoid life. So ultimately, the Doctor has to teach some of the Gonds chemistry in order to make acid, which will poison the Gonds and stop them from exploiting these people, which he does. And thankfully, Zoe's curiosity doesn't get her killed, because she tests out one of the machines that teach the Gonds stuff and ends up almost getting fed to the machine. Luckily, the Doctor prevailed. And then he runs afoul of the Ice Warriors again. This time, they're going after Earth. They're very vulnerable this time, the people of Earth, because they've now adapted transmat technology, although instead of simply calling it transmat, they call it TMAT, basically. But we all know it's transmat. They invade a facility on the moon that uses transmat, or that controls the transmat, in order to seed the planet with these fungal spores that will slowly pull the oxygen down to a level suitable for ice warriors but unsuitable for humans. And it's up to the Doctor, Jamie, Zoe, and the various people on Earth and the Moon to stop them. And for the first time, I think, we see a different armor class for the Ice Warriors. This guy in the middle there, he's more of a leader, and like I said, his helmet is different. But unfortunately, one of the technicians on the moon, well, they end up helping the Ice Warriors do a lot of stuff because he's just plain afraid. Now, he could have chosen honorable death, like his boss who damaged the machine in the first place, which temporarily hindered the Ice Warriors, but he proved to be rather cowardly until he surreptitiously helped the Doctor learn the plans of the Ice Warriors. And he died a warrior's death. So kudos for him. And during all of this, there's sort of a lesson of not relying on one type of technology because it could hinder you in the future if it breaks down. Everybody uses transmats, and the transmat system is controlled via the moon. So space travel via rockets and various modes of transportation on Earth, they're pretty much extinct. It's up to one eccentric who's still got a partially constructed rocket to help the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe get to the moon, because the TARDIS would not land with pinpoint accuracy, and they needed pinpoint accuracy. But ultimately, the Doctor prevailed. He figured out that water kills the Ice Warrior fungus, which was slowly poisoning the world. He helped develop a mobile version of a booby trap that effectively took out the Ice Warriors. And he helped Zoe figure out how to divert the Ice Warriors' spaceships so they would be defeated. And they were. On to the next adventure. Now, this particular adventure, the Space Pirates, that is mostly lost. Excuse me. Only part 2 is available on the Lost in Time DVD. However, with the recent release of The Faceless Ones and Fury from the Deep, and the future release of The Abominable Snowmen and Evil of the Daleks, hopefully the Lost in Time DVD will end up becoming antiquated, because more and more classic Doctor Who is being reanimated, as it were. But for now, all we have are reconstructions and the the surviving episode of the Space Pirates, where Team TARDIS lands on a space station which gets hijacked and separated into pieces by the titular Space Pirates. They're going to steal precious materials on board. And unfortunately, when the Space Pirates take apart the station, Team TARDIS gets separated from the TARDIS and nearly runs out of oxygen if it weren't for an old, well, the future version of an old prospector. He looks like a classic Miner 49er. Sounds like him too. But he's got a spaceship, a space blaster, and he's hunting the same precious materials like the space pirates and the Earth Space Corps. And a company called Asiri, I believe it's called. Anyway, he does technically help the trio, but he also thought they were stealing precious materials that he was mining, as well as what was on the station. But they sort out the misunderstanding and help each other, ultimately. Unfortunately, there's also an Earth Space Corps ship that kind of rubs the Prospector the wrong way. It's kind of like North versus South, only, without the racism. And ultimately, everyone's got to come together to figure out where the hijacked pieces of the station are going in order to stop the pirates and get to the TARDIS. And ultimately, they do find the pirates, and they find out that the head of the corporation that owns the station, she's basically being held hostage by the leader of the pirates, who threatened to slowly kill her imprisoned father if she doesn't cooperate. Luckily, the good guys alert the Earth Space Corps, who take out the enemy spaceships, and the serial ends on a bad joke and a forced laugh. And I hope they reanimate this serial soon, because there's a potential for a really thrilling space battle in the final episode of the serial. And now we come to the very end. The War Games. This time, the Doctor loses. The Team TARDIS ends up in what they think is World War I in Europe, but it's quickly realized that something is wrong. Everyone's got some sort of memory loss. They don't know where they came from. They all have this same memory of entering a mist, and then they were where they are now. Also, the leader of the British troops and the leader of the German troops, they are very, very militant for no good reason. They treat the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe like hostiles, even though they're obviously not. And they use glasses to hypnotize the people around them. Oh, and there's technology sequestered in their private quarters that is clearly not from 1917. Quickly, the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe realize that they're not on Earth. They're on some world that has been broken up into time zones, with stuff like World War I, the Crimean War, Roman times, Russo-Japanese War, American Civil War, and there could be aliens among the human armies. And not all the humans are under control. Some of them have broken off and formed a resistance movement. Unfortunately, this is where my tongue stops working, they're too small and too loose to be of any real threat. Ultimately, when Team TARDIS gain access to a TARDIS-like travel machine, they find out the worst thing has happened. A species of hostile aliens want to test humanity in various ways to use them as cannon fodder to take over the galaxy. But that's not what's the worst. What's worst is they're being helped by a member of the Doctor's own people, a Time Lord. Possibly the Master. I mean, later we do see him get technically killed, but we don't see him regenerate. He could have regenerated, I don't know. Maybe not. It's probably a different Time Lord. Anyway. Basically, the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe have to avoid capture. They get captured a lot in this serial. It probably could have been condensed by a couple episodes, but what are you going to do? Ultimately, they manage to thwart the aliens enough so that the rebels can coordinate and get the better of the bad guys. And the enemy Time Lord even tempts the Doctor with the idea of helping to wrest control of the new empire from these aliens to rule. But his ulterior motive shines through. He no longer has access to his own TARDIS, and the side rats, as they're called, the travel machines the bad guys have been using, they have a radically reduced life, and they're running out. So what the rogue Time Lord wants, really, is the Doctor's TARDIS. Luckily, the Doctor is not stupid enough to fall for that, and ultimately, the rogue Time Lord gets what's coming to him. And the aliens, well, they get what's coming to them as well. But ultimately, the Doctor is in way over his head, and he cannot figure out how to get everyone home. So he has to call his people, the Time Lords. And while they do get everyone home and punish the rogue or the hostile aliens by cutting their world off from the rest of the universe and taking out the leader and his remaining troops as if they never existed, they also punish the Doctor. They send Jamie and Zoe back to their respective homes. Zoe goes back to the wheel in space. Jamie goes back to fighting the Redcoats. And while they do remember their first adventure with the Doctor, they don't remember traveling with him. So their evolution up to that point is wiped away. They live, but they're diminished. It's both a victory and a defeat. As for the... I cannot talk. As for the Doctor, he's allowed to go back to Earth in the 20th century. His TARDIS is disabled, so it can't travel anymore. Furthermore, he's forced to regenerate. And so we bid adieu to Patrick Troughton as the Doctor. And soon we will say hello to John Pertwee as the Doctor. Until then, this is Mr. J signing out and reminding you, never trust the Master, always trust the Brigadier. Sarah Jane is awesome. And now things are going to get a lot more colorful. And there may be a few surprises as well in the coming months. Until then, allons-y!